I stood by the stairs holding my breath. After 28 years, I finally heard the truth they never dared to say to my face. It was close to midnight. I had just come down to get a glass of water, but I stopped halfway when I heard their voices. They didn't know I was awake. They didn't know I was listening. At first, I thought it was just another small argument. They bickered often. But then I heard my name. My father's voice was sharp, like he was holding back years of something heavier than anger. He said, "Raising her was the biggest waste of our lives." My feet went cold. I froze on the stairwell, my hand tight on the railing. I waited for my mother to defend me, to tell him he was being too harsh. But she didn't. Instead, she let out a long sigh and said, "I guess we thought she'd turn out different." That one sentence felt like a quiet slap. Not loud, not violent, just deep. I stood there in silence, not crying, not moving, just trying to understand what I had just heard. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it in my ears. A part of me wanted to run into the room, scream, ask them why. But I didn't. I stood there quietly, letting the words soak in. Every word they spoke after that felt like a needle. They talked about how I was never ambitious enough, how I didn't make them proud, how I was just there, taking up space. I felt like a guest in my own home. I quietly stepped back up the stairs, careful not to make a sound. The hallway felt colder now. I walked back into my room, shut the door slowly, and sat on the edge of my bed. My hands were trembling. I kept replaying those words in my head. The biggest waste of our lives. It wasn't just disappointment I felt. It was a kind of grief. Like something died that night. Not me, but the part of me that still believed I mattered to them. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. I stared at the ceiling for a long time before I sat up. It wasn't just about what I'd heard last night. It was everything that led up to it. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was just the first time they'd said it out loud. Growing up, I was always the quiet one. I wasn't difficult. I didn't demand much. I kept to myself, always afraid of causing trouble. My younger brother, Evan, was the opposite. Loud, charming, always the center of attention. People loved him. My parents adored him. He was the one they talked about at church, the one they introduced proudly at family gatherings. And I was just there, standing beside him in every family photo like a shadow. I remember birthdays where Evan would get a huge cake with all his friends over and I'd just get a card. One year they forgot it was even my birthday. I had to remind Mom in the evening when she asked why I looked so sad. She laughed and said, "Oh, sweetheart, you're too sensitive." That phrase followed me through my entire childhood. Too sensitive. I heard it when I cried because they left me behind on a trip to Disneyland. I was 10. Evan was 7 and they took him with them, saying it was a reward for his good grades. I stayed home with an aunt and pretended I didn't care, but I cried into my pillow for 3 nights. When I asked why I couldn't go, Dad just said, "You wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway." There were dinners where they'd talk about family plans, holidays, house renovations, and I'd only find out days later. My name was never in the conversation. I was never asked what I thought. Even in small things like what we'd eat for Christmas or who we'd visit on Thanksgiving, my opinion didn't count. It wasn't just that I was left out. It was that nobody seemed to notice. When Evan broke his arm, the whole house turned upside down. When I got the flu and had a 104-degree fever, Mom left soup on my nightstand and said, "You'll be fine." Even school achievements went unnoticed. I once came second in a writing competition, and the teacher called home to congratulate my parents. They never brought it up. Evan scored a goal in a soccer match and there were banners on the garage door. I got used to the background. I trained myself not to expect anything. But deep inside I always thought maybe one day they'd see me. Maybe if I was patient and kind enough, they'd finally be proud of me. That hope kept me going for years. Until last night when I heard the truth. My 28th birthday was the day everything inside me finally went quiet. Not broken, not angry, just quiet. I woke up that morning with a little bit of hope, the kind I couldn't kill no matter how hard I tried. I told myself maybe this year would be different. Maybe they'd remember. Maybe they'd make time. I got up early and cleaned the whole house even though I didn't need to. I cooked dinner. Nothing fancy, just the dishes I knew they liked. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, that broccoli salad Mom used to request every Sunday. I even baked a small cake from scratch. It wasn't perfect, but I tried. I lit candles around the table and wore the blue sweater I knew looked decent on me. Kept checking the clock. 6 o'clock. 7. 8. Still nothing. By 9 the candles had burned out. The food had gone cold. And I was still sitting there waiting. I finally picked up my phone and checked social media. That's when I saw it. My mom had posted pictures from a beach trip. Her, Dad and Evan. Smiling, sunglasses on, drinks in hand. The caption read, "A perfect weekend with our boy. So proud of the man you've become." That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not because they forgot, but because they chose. They chose to be somewhere else. They chose to celebrate someone else. On my birthday, I sat there at the dining table in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the flickering light from my phone screen, scrolling through their photos. Picture after picture of them laughing, hugging, posing like a perfect family. Family I was never truly part of. I had cooked for people who never planned to show up. I had saved a seat for a mother who was sipping cocktails on the coast, and a father who had once said raising me was a waste. I looked at the empty chairs across from me, and for the first time I truly accepted it. I didn't belong. Not here. Not with them. I packed up the food slowly and put the cake in the fridge. I didn't eat. I wasn't hungry anymore. The house was quiet, too quiet, but it matched how I felt inside. Numb. Not sad. Just tired. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling again. No candles. No calls. Not even a text. My phone stayed silent. And so did I. But unlike every other year, I didn't try to explain it away. I didn't tell myself they were busy. I didn't make excuses. I just knew. This time I really knew. It's funny how silence can be louder than anything. The kind of silence that fills up a room until it's suffocating, like the stillness after a storm. That night, after hearing their words, I didn't say a word. I didn't shout, didn't demand answers. I didn't cry. I just stood there frozen. But inside, everything was unraveling, piece by piece. I woke up early the next morning not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. The weight of what had happened pressed down on me, but I couldn't stay in bed. I couldn't be there anymore. I went to the closet, picked up my old work uniform. It was simple. Nothing glamorous, just a navy blue blouse and slacks that barely fit anymore. The ones they used to mock me for wearing. "You're still in that job?" my dad would say, sneering. "At your age you should be running something. But no, you just do menial work, don't you?" I stared at the uniform in my hands. The fabric felt rough against my skin. For a moment I thought about tossing it aside, never touching it again. But instead I folded it neatly as if I was still playing the role of the obedient daughter. Silent. There was no anger in me, just a quiet sort of resignation. I packed my suitcase slowly. Each item I folded, each zipper I closed felt like a decision I had been avoiding for years. The suitcase was small, just enough for a few changes of clothes. No fancy shoes, no excess. Just the bare minimum. I didn't need anything else. The rest of the house, the memories, the things I had worked so hard for over the years, stayed behind. The clothes I bought with my own money, the furniture I paid for with what little I earned, none of it mattered now. I paused for a moment, standing by the suitcase, thinking, should I take my childhood diary? The one with all my hidden dreams, hopes and frustrations written in it? The one my parents never once asked about, never once cared to read? I thought about it for a second, but then I shook my head. Oh, it didn't belong here anymore. Instead, I grabbed a simple backpack, the kind I used when I worked extra shifts, and started filling it with a few essentials. My ID. A notebook. A pen. My phone. No sentimental things. No more pretending. I moved like a ghost, trying not to make a sound, but each movement felt heavy, each step a painful reminder of everything I had lost. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their validation. The truth had been laid bare, and in that quiet, devastating moment I realized I didn't need them at all. The suitcase was ready. The backpack was packed. And as I stood there staring at the house I grew up in, I couldn't bring myself to look at the pictures on the walls. The family photos that told a story I wasn't really a part of. I didn't need to say goodbye. I just turned and walked out, closing the door behind me softly. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what was next. Because nothing could hurt more than what had already happened. I was done. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that fills every corner, echoing in your mind, making every breath sound too loud, too real. I had everything packed. My suitcase by the door, my backpack slung over my shoulder. I stood in the living room looking around one last time. I could have just left. I could have slipped out, no one the wiser, no one needing to know why. But somehow I couldn't. I couldn't leave without saying something. Without finally speaking the words that had been trapped inside me for years. I walked to the kitchen table. It was where we'd always gathered as a family, though I never really felt like I belonged at that table. They had their conversations, their inside jokes, their shared stories while I sat quietly invisible. The kitchen table, so full of memories of holidays, of birthdays, of family dinners that never included me, was now the place where I would say my final goodbye. Not in person but through a letter. I pulled out a piece of paper and began to write, my hand steady even though my heart was breaking. It was a strange mix of calm and chaos, this moment. The act of writing felt both like a release and a punishment. But I needed to do it. For me. For them. I needed to say the things they never wanted to hear, the things they'd refused to see. Dear Mom and Dad, I want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for raising me, for providing a roof over my head, for the things you did give me, things that, looking back, I know I should have appreciated more. But I also want to tell you what you never saw, what you never cared enough to notice. I've spent my entire life trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me. Every moment I spent waiting for your approval, for your love, I only ended up pushing myself further away from the person I was supposed to be. I've spent years feeling like I didn't matter, like I wasn't enough. I remember the times I'd come home with awards from school, excited, hoping you'd be proud of me. But you were never there. I remember being the last to get picked for everything. Sports teams, family trips, even simple conversations. I was always the extra one. Never the important one. You told me I was too sensitive, that I needed to toughen up. But the truth is, I was never given the chance to be anything other than what you wanted me to be. I never got to be just me. I don't know if you ever understood that. But I don't think you ever tried to. I've spent so many years of my life believing I was broken, that I wasn't enough. But the truth is, you broke me. Not because you didn't love me, but because you never truly saw me. You never understood how your coldness shaped me, how your indifference made me stronger, but also scarred me in ways I'll never be able to undo. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not sad. I'm just done. I've included a few photos here. Moments from my childhood, things you missed while you were too busy with Evan, too focused on your perfect son to notice your daughter. The school awards you never came to. The birthdays you weren't there for. I don't want anything from you, but I want you to know these moments. They mattered to me. And now I'm leaving. Not because I have to, but because I need to. I'm taking everything I've learned and everything you never gave me, and I'm going to make something of myself. You won't see it. You probably won't even care. But I'll be okay. I always was. Goodbye. Your name. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the kitchen table. The place where so many things had been left unsaid, where so many moments had been missed. I didn't sign it with any flourish, no last plea for them to understand. There was no more room for that. I just left the words, raw and honest, as my final goodbye. I walked away from the kitchen, from the house, from the life that had never really been mine. I didn't look back. Not even once. They wouldn't get it. They wouldn't understand. But the truth was finally out there, and that was enough for me. I found a place to stay, a temporary haven, with a friend who had always been kind to me, though I never truly realized how much that kindness meant until now. Her apartment was small, nothing extravagant, but it was mine for the time being. There was no need for grand gestures or explanations. It was a safe space, and that's all I needed. I started working a small job. Nothing glamorous, just a regular position at a local cafe. But for the first time in my life, it felt like a choice. I wasn't doing it to prove anything to anyone. I wasn't trying to earn anyone's approval. It was just something I did because it felt right. The work wasn't hard, but it gave me a sense of purpose that I hadn't had in years. It was my own, and that made all the difference. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like in the movies where I found some magical solution to all my problems. Oh, it was quiet. Each day was another small step toward healing. I'd wake up to the sound of birds chirping outside the window, not the harshness of my father's voice or the cold silence from my mother. I began to cherish the stillness. It wasn't loneliness, it was peace. Real peace. I found myself again, not in grand moments but in small things. I had moments when I laughed freely, when I didn't think about what anyone else expected from me. I didn't feel the weight of judgment or the need to live up to someone else's standards. And then I made another decision. I signed up for therapy. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I knew I had to start somewhere. I had carried so much for so long: anger, resentment, fear. It felt like lifting the weight of 1,000 invisible bricks from my chest, brick by brick with every session. The sessions weren't easy. In fact, they were hard. I had to confront emotions and truths I had buried deep inside for years. But slowly I started to feel lighter. Each time I spoke, I felt more like myself. I wasn't holding back anymore. I wasn't pretending to be someone I wasn't. For the first time, I felt like I was allowed to just be. I also stopped waiting for things that would never come. I stopped waiting for a call from my parents. A message. An apology. I realized in those quiet moments by myself that I didn't need any of it. I had been waiting for years for something that wasn't going to happen. And the more I waited, the more I lost of myself. There were days when I still wondered if they'd ever try to reach out, if they'd ever care, but then I'd remind myself, this was my life now. And it was up to me to live it on my own terms. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for them, not for anyone. Slowly but surely I was rebuilding myself, piece by piece. Not with grand declarations or dramatic comebacks, but with quiet victories. I was learning to breathe without waiting for permission. I was learning that I didn't need anyone else's approval to be whole. I had found my voice. And I was ready to let it speak loud and clear on my own. 2 weeks had passed since I left. The silence was comforting, though I could still feel the weight of everything behind me. I had found a rhythm in my new life, the small victories that added up, and the peace that slowly started to sink in. I had no idea how much time had passed since I last spoke to them, nor did I care. It was easier this way, living without their expectations weighing on me. But then one afternoon the phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was an unfamiliar number, but there was something in my gut that told me it was him. My father. I hesitated for a moment before answering, my fingers trembling just slightly. "Hello," I said, my voice steady though my heart raced. Is this you?" His voice came through, trembling, uncertain. It was so different from the usual authoritative tone, the one that used to make me shrink back in fear. This one was soft, almost broken. "It's me," I replied, keeping my voice calm, letting the silence stretch out between us. There was a long pause. I could hear him taking a deep breath as if gathering his thoughts. We didn't know," he said finally, his voice cracking slightly. "We didn't understand how much we hurt you. When we read your letter. He stopped and I could hear the muffled sound of him wiping his eyes. "I cried, you know. I never thought we could be so cruel. I never saw it until now." I stayed silent. He wasn't used to this, speaking like this, without the control, without the harshness. I knew he wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was just trying to understand. And for once I let him speak. "I never wanted you to feel like you weren't enough," he continued, his voice small. "But I can't change what I've done. I can't undo the years." I could feel a lump forming in my throat. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell him everything I had carried for so long. But I didn't. I simply listened. "I just wanted you to know I'm sorry," he finished quietly. There was another pause. A long one. And in that silence I realized something. For the first time in my life, my father wasn't the towering figure of authority he had always been. He wasn't the strong, unyielding man I had grown up with. In this moment he was just a man, vulnerable and small. "I'm not angry anymore," I said softly, the words coming easier than I expected. "But I'm done waiting for you to love me. I've learned to love myself now." And with that the call ended. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing more to say. But I felt lighter somehow. Maybe because for the first time I had finally let go of the need for their approval. I didn't go back. Not to their house, not to the life I had once known, the life I thought I had to live for their approval. The phone call had been a turning point, a softening I hadn't expected. My father's voice, trembling and regretful, had cracked something inside me. But even though he had apologized, there was no going back. There was no rebuilding what had already been broken for so many years. I thought long and hard before I made my decision. I had been living for them for so long, bending myself to fit into their narrow world of expectations. I had waited for years for a love I would never receive. So when I looked at my phone, the message was simple but clear. "I needed you for 28 years. You had me. Now I need me." I sent it and then I set the phone down. I didn't need a reply. I didn't need any more validation. The words were final. And in that moment, I realized how freeing it was to stop waiting for someone else to give me permission to live. I wasn't a daughter longing for approval anymore. I wasn't someone's afterthought. I was simply me. I walked back to my small apartment, the one that I had made mine, the one I had built from nothing but quiet resolve. It wasn't grand, but it was peaceful. It wasn't filled with the chaos of expectations or the pressure to be someone I wasn't. It was just simple. It was mine. I stood in the living room for a moment, looking out the window at the sun setting over the city. The room was bare except for a few pieces of furniture, some plants, and pictures of my own. Not the ones they took of me at family gatherings, but the ones I had chosen for myself. They were reminders of the life I was finally allowed to have, the one where I made my own choices. And as I stood there, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't the release of anger or resentment. It was something deeper, something stronger. It was the realization that silence had been my ally all along. The silence I had chosen to embrace in leaving, the silence that had carried me through all those years of being unseen. That silence had been the loudest message I could ever send. Sometimes silence is not weakness, I whispered to myself, the words feeling like a weight being lifted off my chest. Sometimes, silence is the only thing that speaks truth. And in that moment I knew I had made the right choice. Not because I had turned my back on them, but because I had finally turned toward myself. For the first time in 28 years I was living for me, and that was enough.